Made possible through support from ARC Thrift Stores, Colorado District Attorney's Council, Developmental Pathways, and the ARC of Aurora. A THINK+change training.
Hello, everyone out there. My name is Hani Rayleigh with the ARC of Aurora and THINK+change, coming at you with episode 3 of our Rights of People with IDD vodcast podcast series. I have here with us today Paul Spragg. He is in private practice, a forensic psychologist, but has been involved with people with IDD for decades, really has committed and dedicated his entire career to supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to better understand themselves, the community, and certainly supporting organizations like ours in getting there. So thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Hey, anytime, literally. So Paul, in our earlier episodes, the advocacy team with the ARC of Aurora talked a lot about what rights look like for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and specifically adults in that DD system, knowing that there are many processes in place to support individuals with disabilities in feeling safe and secure in their home and community environment, but also the functions of service providers to make sure that they're able to support people safely. So I just wanted to throw a softball at you maybe and ask you a little bit about what your experience is around the rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities now and maybe future past, whatever you want to tell us about what you know.
Well, I grew up at a very interesting time as far as services and supports were concerned with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That would be the 60s. And I think people were just then beginning to become a little bit more aware, a little bit more cognizant that warehousing people with disabilities in institutions, giving them lots of protections, but no freedom to speak of, that there must be a better way. And I graduated, did my training in the 70s, which is when a lot of the major pieces of legislation and disability came about. We're talking the Education for All Children's, Handicapped Children's Act, PL 94-142. We're talking about Rehabilitation Act. Mm-hmm. So these concerns and that were prompted by the advocacy community primarily, both grassroots and then formal advocacy efforts, prompted development and passage of these groundbreaking laws that started to codify the specific rights of people with disabilities. Yeah. I had done a summer placement at the Vineland State School in New Jersey, which is how I became involved in the field. Interned again in a disability school when I graduated with a master's degree. Concentrated in disability in my doctoral program, and been involved ever since, both as a psychologist in a couple of different community center boards, a consultant with what was then the Department of, or the Division of Developmental Disabilities. When I eventually went into private practice, I decided to continue to concentrate in that field. So I have had the opportunity to grow alongside a lot of very important developments and kind of see things unfold over the years, which has been edifying, to say the least.
I can only imagine. And, you talk about the history of really recognizing in the community that people with disabilities have rights, and that institutionalization was not necessarily the path towards accessing and really experiencing those rights in a way that you and I might have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
So knowing that, and we talked a little bit about in our earlier episodes around what the Human Rights Committee is really set up to do, to support people with disabilities in Colorado, and making sure that their rights are protected, even if there are some processes in place to ensure that they continue to remain safe in the community. Can you tell us a little bit about what you know about the Human Rights Committee and what you've kind of seen its own journey over the years as well?
Sure. Well, I forget exactly when they were enacted in Colorado. It must have been in the mid 80s, I think, sometime. I don't know if you know the answer to that. But I do know that when I was working at what is now the JFK Center, or JFK Partners for Developmental Disabilities, we were approached by the then division director to put together a manual explaining what human rights committees were, and to develop a casebook of examples of situations in which, tested and challenged the reader to identify what the potential issues were, and to kind of think it through, discuss, and make some recommendations as if they were actually participating in the Human Rights Committee. That was, I don't know whatever happened. I mean, it obviously is now out of print, but I think it was pretty widely disseminated at the time. And I had also drawn on my own experience as a participant in human rights committees, and chaired a couple of those committees. And the primary role or function that we had was more oversight and more protection and safeguarding of rights, as opposed to any, what I would say, proactive or social involvement in rights. So we would review the appropriateness of behavior plans, which is still a function of, in fact, all of these are still functions, the monitoring of psychotropic medications, monitoring rights suspensions, investigation of allegations of abuse and neglect. And all of those, as I thought about it, were really pretty reactive strategies, right? I mean, you're safeguarding rights, meaning you're acting as an enforcer for the laws that were promulgated by Colorado to safeguard the rights of people with disabilities. So it was a good start, but as I say, it was more reactive. It was more program approval oriented rather than actively promoting the rights of people with disabilities. They certainly served an important function, but I think the role needs to change in the future.
For sure. Well, and I know that the state of Colorado right now, what is it, October of 2021, is looking at ways in which HRC can both support individuals with disabilities, but also provide navigation and guidance to program approved service agencies.
Right.
So that you're getting a little bit of both. But we also know that, coming soon to a provider near us is the final settings rules, right?
Yeah.
Which really, from an advocacy perspective, we really see this as the, the guarantee of the ADA and the guarantee of community living, where some of the pieces and details included in the final settings rule feel pretty like no-brainers to a lot of folks, right? That an individual that has a relationship around housing with a service provider or independent contractor, that they should have tenant rights and a lease in place to know what's expected out of them. So can you tell us a little bit more about how final settings might assist in the HRC process, or even if it's not maybe an HRC-based discussion, how do final settings really support people with disabilities to really, start to realize some of those promises and dreams that I think most of us have?
Right. Well, I guess what I would say is that the final settings really sort of puts the icing on the cake in terms of how services to people living and working in the community should unfold. And it is a means of again, it's more of it's more promulgating rules than it is active promotion of rights, if you say it that way. But it is still a leap forward in terms of making sure that programs providing community-based services are doing their best to integrate people with disabilities into the community, to afford them same opportunities, to give them chances to choose, to make decisions, to take control over their lives. And I think if there is a distinction between the list of rights that's codified in law and the final rule, there's more emphasis on choice. There's more emphasis on freedom, autonomy. Those are more general principles than just, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's a more proactive stance. This is how you should be promoting these rights. And it's not just a matter of enforcement or obeying a dictate or a rule or checking a box. It is more about active engagement on how to promote community participation and full inclusion in the community.
Yeah, I love that. And I really think that there's this opportunity to talk about choice in a way that I think we want for people with disabilities, we want for the families, we want for individuals who are exploring their options, but also trying to balance that with, that dignity of risk, right? From the 70s, we've deinstitutionalized, we're in the community. And now I think that we're in a place of real kind of community, like the rub, right? Is this a rehabilitative model that we're delivering services in? Versus is this long-term services and supports what it should be, right? Meeting that person where they're at. And I'm curious to see kind of where we find that balance, right? The final settings rule feels almost like a mission statement, right? That we believe in this, and we believe this for people with disabilities. Right. But I'm sure you're seeing too from your work that the flip side of service provision world has always really been rooted in rules, regulation. How do we follow it? How do we do it? Right. And so this balance is really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as moving away from a paternalistic, protective stance to a more, problem-solving autonomy. And that is now the charge given to direct care providers, is how do you enhance choices and how do you make available those choices? And most importantly, how do you teach somebody how to choose and make decisions? That's something I think we still need to be very mindful of. That it's one thing to say, you have now choices, but if you don't know how to make a choice or make a decision, you've never had that experience, it's all well and good to have the dignity of failure, but when you're talking about an inevitability of failure because you have not equipped the individual in terms of how to make a choice, then it becomes problematic. And as a mental health professional, I happen to think the dignity of risk is probably one of the most single important elements that comes out of the final rule. People need to allow people with developmental and intellectual disabilities the same opportunities to succeed or fail as are available to everyone else. You and I had talked a little bit earlier about, as a psychologist, where my focus and interest in it, and that is actually where my focus and interest is. When I first came into the field, there was a lot of research into the personality of people with intellectual disability. Well, they're more anxious, they're more externally oriented, they depend on others and on external cues, so they're more dependent. And when you think about it, those are all outcomes of what happens when you don't have choice, you don't have control, you don't have power. then you come down with what can only be described as clinically, induced or, stress induced issues and problems. So
Yeah.
what I would anticipate and hope for is that as we get, as we built in these choice-making programs and encourage and allow for greater freedom of choice, that we will begin to see some of these so-called personality characters begin to dissipate, because if you're in control, you're less anxious, right? If you're able to make decisions, you've got improved self-esteem, right? So you're not as depressed. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I think as a psychologist, from my standpoint, there is a mental health benefit to the rule that is not always articulated or laid out there. But that's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah, it's going to be really neat to watch. And I think, as much as we talk about choice and dignity of risk for people with disabilities, there should be a level of assumption that also that should be passed to direct care workers and independent contractors, right? In this very human, natural way that we support each other versus these scripts and task analysis and, this constant thread of liability while there are service providers paid to provide a service. How can we do so in a way that feels a lot more reasonable and feels, organic to the actual human delivering that service too?
Yeah, well, I think we need to rethink the sort of concept of direct care, because that in and of itself implies you are providing care and quote treatment as opposed to instruction and how to do things. So I would almost think that if you redefine the role as more, we're facilitators. Excuse me. Get rid of this. Sorry.
Yes.
My son calling from Florida. So what I was saying is that what was I saying? I forgot. Got a little distracted.
Well, we were talking about that when we take away the care and the rehab model.
Oh yeah. If we redefine the role as like provider of services to enabler of empowerment, then I think that's one way of looking at it is, you're not there to enforce, maintain rules, to provide protection and care. You're there to actively provide habilitation in the true sense of the word, learning how to, not just adaptive skills, but the more cognitive skills of making decisions, making choices. And you're there as a safety net, but you're not there to smother the person with all kinds of protection.
For sure. And it really looks a lot like what we do in our natural relationships, that really are, if my friend needed, access or support to sign up for a rec center class or something like that, that wouldn't necessarily mean I do for, but I could do with. And I think that that's really, when we look at the rights of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, how much have we assumed that we need to do for versus we do with, and so that people really have the opportunity to express those rights and to navigate them and ask questions as we kind of meander through what the world looks like, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a little heretical, but it's almost like you have to build in opportunities for failure.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, we kind of moved that far. It's not just about opportunities for success. It's, can we set up opportunities in which decisions get made that will allow for the possibility of failure, but in a supportive, constructive way.
Exactly.
So that's how you develop coping skills. You don't develop coping skills if you're sheltered and overprotected your entire life, right? Or if you're told what to do.
Yeah.
Again, I keep coming back to that dignity of risk, being allowed to fail, being supported when you fail, but to provide, and this is the important flip side, to make sure that simultaneously you are providing tools to make those choices and decisions and to become better at it as time goes by.
You got it. Yeah, we talked a little bit as our team about the balance between dignity of risk along with hypernormalization, right? Because we come to people with IDD knowing that they need support, understanding that there's intellectual disabilities. And so it's not good enough to say, we're going to let this person fail in a way that's super unsafe without having those tools, right? And then the coping strategies and teaching to go along with it and put people in unsafe positions. So it's this balance.
Sure. Well, the very idea of support implies that you are giving a measure of control to the individual that you're supporting. You're not providing protection anymore. You're not providing care and treatment anymore. You're providing support. You're supporting people, not advising them, not taking care of them. You are teaching them to take care of themselves, not just adaptively, but also in some of these other more cognitive-oriented decision-making processes, choice-making processes. And that, I think, is the path to improve mental health for people with the intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Absolutely. I sit firmly in your corner, Paul, so I appreciate your perspective. Well, those are the only questions I have for you. Do you have anything else that you want to share with our organization, all of the listeners or viewers?
Well, you got me there, honey. I don't know that I came prepared with my own questions. But, I'm happy to speak with anybody who wants to give me a jingle if they want to delve into some of these issues and, in more detail. I really appreciate the time that you have given me this morning to kind of speak out on those issues. I think it's an exciting time. I think the chances for a significant change are probably greater now than they have been in a long time.
Yeah.
So I think we're on the cusp of a major change in attitude and a major change in perception about what people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can accomplish and how we can support them to get there.
Totally. And what do they want, right? I think that we in the service world really come to people with disabilities with already identified solutions to problems that we're not even sure maybe everyone has. Right. And so I agree. I think this is an exciting time, and it really does feel like, the intent is to start to really realize some of these pieces of what community life and human rights and civil rights should look like for everyone in our community. So I just appreciate your time, Paul, and most definitely your commitment to continuing this discussion and continuing the trajectory and the potential future of people with IDD and their families. So I just thank you so much for everything.
Well, and you guys at Aurora ARC do incredible work. Keep it up. I love working with you guys. So anytime I can be of any help, let me know.
Awesome. Well, the feeling is mutual. So for everyone out there listening and or watching, thanks so much for joining us again. Look for us in the future with upcoming podcasts, all intended to provide just a different perspective on what life looks like or could be like for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. So thank you guys so much. And thank you, Paul. Take care.
THINK+change. Talks, trainings, and tools to help in your work for or with people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. Learn more at www.thinkchange.training.